A millionaire was heartbroken when he lost his little daughter. A few years later, while doing charity work, he saw a homeless woman. The sky over Manhattan stretched pale and cold, streaked with faint hints of orange as the city prepared for dusk. Richard Watkins sat in his glass-walled office, perched high above the chaos of the streets below. The city pulsed with life, horns blaring, lights flickering, people moving with purpose. But here, in his sanctuary, the silence was deafening. He leaned back in the ergonomic chair that had been custom-fitted to his frame, yet it felt foreign tonight. His eyes rested on the single photograph on the corner of his polished desk. 2 children smiled back at him. Doris, her curls bouncing under a pink sun hat, her gap-toothed grin radiating pure joy, and Daniel, her twin, clutching a plastic car, wide-eyed and serious. The memories came, unbidden. The twins' giggles had once echoed in every corner of his life. Doris had a way of tugging on his sleeve, her soft voice pleading, "Come play, Daddy," as if she owned the right to his time. And she did. Daniel, quieter, would linger in the background, waiting for Richard to notice him. But Rachel was always quicker. She'd scoop up Daniel and hold him close, murmuring endearments Richard couldn't hear, leaving Doris to find her place beside him. "Daddy, can we make cookies?" Doris's little voice echoed in his memory, her cheeks dusted with flour, her laughter lighting up their cavernous kitchen. "Just the 2 of us." He swallowed hard and shifted his gaze to the New York skyline, where the first lights of the evening blinked on like stars. The weight of those days pressed heavily on him now, but the darker memory crept in with jagged edges. The crash, the metal crunching, Rachel's scream. Richard's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. He could still see Daniel's small body, lifeless in the ambulance. Rachel hysterical in the corner, and Doris, so small, so scared, clinging to him for survival. He had whispered assurances he didn't believe. "It's going to be okay. Daddy's here." Except it hadn't been okay. Not for Rachel, not for Doris, not for him. The months after the accident blurred into a montage of grief. Rachel retreated into herself, her days consumed by locked doors and silences. Doris, abandoned in a home where love had vanished, also became quiet. She stopped asking for cookies and stopped tugging on Richard's sleeve. She learned not to cry when Rachel snapped or when the dinners went uncooked. "Richard," Rachel had said one evening, her voice like broken glass, "you don't get it, do you? You don't feel what I feel. You didn't lose him the way I did." He'd wanted to argue, but her expression, a mix of accusation and devastation, rendered him silent. Instead, he watched her walk away, her figure swallowed by the shadows of their now empty home. And then came the battle. Not the screaming matches, they'd had plenty of those, but the legal one. Rachel, clutching her grief and guilt, clung to Doris with a ferocity Richard couldn't match. He tried. He brought in lawyers, therapists and mediators, hoping logic would prevail. He presented charts of Rachel's instability and spreadsheets of his ability to provide a safe, stable environment. But the judge didn't see the empty wine bottles Rachel left under the sink. The judge didn't see Doris tiptoeing into the living room, holding a stuffed bunny and asking, "Is Mommy okay today?" No, the judge only saw Rachel's tears and Richard's calculated stoicism. Custody remained hers. The photograph on the desk blurred as Richard's vision clouded. He wiped his eyes quickly, an old reflex born of a life lived under scrutiny. A knock at the door pulled him from the spiral. His assistant, Caroline, poked her head in, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Mr. Watkins, your 6 o'clock is here." "Give me a moment," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within. As the door clicked shut, Richard leaned forward, clasping his hands together. He was a man accustomed to control, to solutions. But this was a problem he couldn't fix with money, influence, or strategy. Doris needed him, and he had failed her. Outside, the city thrived, oblivious to the battles waged within its gleaming towers. But inside, Richard sat still, the photograph watching him with silent reproach. Somewhere out there, Doris lived in a world he could no longer touch, and the weight of that distance threatened to crush him. The phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him back to the present. The meeting awaited, the contracts needed signing, and the deals needed closing. He straightened his tie, forced his face into the mask of success he wore so well, and stood. But as he left the office, his mind stayed tethered to the photograph and the family he'd once thought unbreakable. The apartment was quiet, but not the comforting kind of quiet that settles in after a long day. It was the kind of quiet that pressed into the walls, stale and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the aging floorboards. Shadows stretched long in the dim light of a single bulb, hanging in the kitchen, swaying faintly, as if tired of its own effort. Doris sat cross-legged on the frayed carpet of the living room, her small hands carefully arranging an assortment of buttons, bottle caps, and a single cracked marble into what might have been a game, or simply a distraction. Her lips moved faintly, forming words she didn't speak aloud. A stuffed bunny, its ear hanging limp from a loose seam, watched from the corner. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast and something unidentifiable, something left too long in the sink. Doris's eyes flickered to the kitchen doorway, where the silhouette of Rachel slumped against the faded wallpaper. Her mother's head rested in one hand, her other clutching a cigarette that had long since burned out. An untouched mug of coffee cooled on the counter. "Mommy!" Doris's voice was soft, uncertain. Rachel didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the peeling wallpaper, lost in a haze Doris couldn't understand. The knock at the door startled them both. Doris scrambled to her feet, clutching the bunny to her chest. Rachel blinked and slowly straightened, brushing her hair back as if shaking off a fog. "It's him," she muttered under her breath, the bitterness curling her lips. Doris watched as Rachel crossed to the door and opened it. Impeccably dressed in a crisp suit, Richard stood out against the chipped paint and dull lighting of the hallway. He held a small gift bag in one hand and a folder in the other. "Hello, Rachel," he said evenly, his eyes darting past her to find Doris. "She's fine," Rachel said curtly, blocking the doorway. "I'd like to see her," Richard replied, his tone calm but firm. Rachel stepped aside with a sigh of annoyance, and Richard entered, his shoes clicking softly against the worn linoleum. Doris stood frozen in the living room, clutching the bunny tighter. "Hey, Pumpkin," Richard said, his expression softening as he crouched to her level. "I brought you something." Doris hesitated, her eyes flickering to Rachel, who leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed. Richard noticed the glance, and his jaw tightened, but he kept his smile in place as he held out the bag. Doris finally stepped forward, her small fingers brushing his as she took the bag. Inside was a set of watercolor paints, bright and new, unlike anything else in the apartment. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, her face lit up. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Richard's smile wavered. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Richard's smile faltered as his eyes swept the room. The clutter, the dishes, the stack of bills. His expression hardened. He straightened, his gaze settling on Rachel. "Rachel," he said, his tone clipped. She didn't respond, her focus still fixed on the screen. "Rachel," he repeated, louder this time. "What?" Her voice was flat, her eyes finally shifting to him. "We need to talk," he said, glancing at Doris. "Why don't you go play in your room for a bit, sweetheart?" Doris hesitated, her grip tightening on the rabbit. "Do I have to?" "It's okay, honey," he said gently. "I'll come get you soon." Reluctantly, she shuffled toward her room, pausing at the door to look back. Richard and Rachel stood facing each other, their postures tense. She slipped inside, but left the door ajar, her small form crouching just behind it. "You call this parenting?" Richard's voice was sharp, barely restrained. Rachel snorted, a hollow sound. "Oh, don't start. You think dropping by with a stuffed animal makes you Father of the Year?" "I'm trying to be here for her, Rachel. She's a child. She needs more than this mess." "Don't you dare lecture me," she snapped, her voice rising. "You weren't there when Daniel—" Richard cut her off, his tone firm. "This isn't about Daniel. This is about Doris." The mention of Daniel's name ignited a spark. Rachel's voice cracked, her composure slipping. "Don't act like you're the saint here. You're barely around. You only appear when it suits you, but after that, what happens? You think you can judge me?" "I'm trying to help, Rachel, but you—" He stopped, glancing toward Doris's room. His voice dropped, weighted now. "You're not okay. You need help." "I don't need anything from you," she hissed, her arms crossing defensively. "I don't need you, and I don't need—" She faltered, her eyes darting toward the hallway. Doris leaned back against the wall, her small hands clutching the rabbit tightly. She didn't fully understand the words, but the anger and pain in their voices wrapped around her like a cold wind. Her stomach knotted, fear creeping in. The argument ended as abruptly as it had begun, the apartment falling silent once more. When Richard left, the click of the door echoed in Doris's ears, final and heavy. She stayed in her room, the stuffed rabbit cradled in her lap, her gaze fixed on the doorway, as if waiting for him to return. Rachel stood there for a moment, her shoulders sagging, before retreating to the kitchen. Doris heard the clink of glass and the splash of liquid. She sat back on the floor, the watercolor paints in her lap. She traced the edge of the box with one finger, but didn't open it. Doris comes to Rachel. "Mommy?" she said again, her voice smaller this time. "What?" Rachel snapped from the kitchen. Can we paint together?" The sound of the glass hitting the counter was loud in the quiet apartment. "Not now, Doris," Rachel said, her voice flat. Doris sat there for a long time, the paints untouched. The bunny fell to the floor, its limp ear brushing against the carpet. The light bulb flickered once and went out. The park was damp, the rain falling in a persistent drizzle that soaked into the worn hoodie Doris clutched around her small shoulders. The afternoon sky was a dull grey, the kind of colour that blurred the lines between day and evening. Water pooled in shallow puddles on the cracked pathways, reflecting the skeletal branches of the trees overhead. Rachel walked ahead of her, arms folded tight across her chest, her face set in a blank expression. She barely glanced back as Doris lagged behind, her tiny boots scuffing the wet ground. The park should have been lively with the sounds of children laughing and playing, but today it was deserted, the swings creaking softly in the wind. Doris stopped near the sandbox, her eyes caught by a flash of colour, a bright red shovel half buried in the damp sand. She knelt to retrieve it, her fingers curling around the handle, but when she looked up again, Rachel was gone. "Mommy." Her voice trembled slightly, but the sound was swallowed by the empty expanse of the park. Doris stood, clutching the shovel like a talisman. She turned in a slow circle, her eyes darting from one pathway to another. "Mommy!" There was no answer. The edges of panic began to creep in, tightening her chest as she ran in the direction Rachel had been walking. The drizzle turned heavier, the drops cold against her skin. Her boots splashed through puddles, sending ripples across the water, but each pathway she turned down seemed to stretch endlessly into the grey. Doris stopped running. She didn't know where she was anymore. Her legs felt shaky, her breath coming in short gasps. Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Richard hadn't seen her for a month since his argument with Rachel. The feeling of loneliness had never gnawed at her so much. "Mommy," she whispered again, her voice barely audible now. The city swallowed her cries. She wandered further from the park, her small figure dwarfed by the towering buildings that loomed on either side of the narrow street. The asphalt glistened under the rain, and the faint glow of neon signs flickered through the mist. Cars hissed by, their tires cutting through the wet streets, but no one stopped to notice the lost girl. Near a bridge, Doris finally sank to the ground, pulling her knees to her chest. The red shovel slipped from her grasp and lay forgotten beside her. Her small frame shivered in the cold, her tears falling silently now. "Hey, sweetheart." The voice was soft, roughened around the edges like gravel worn smooth by time. Doris looked up to see a woman standing a few feet away. Her coat was patched and oversized, her hair pulled into a messy bun beneath a knit cap. Her face was lined with age and hardship, but her eyes were kind. "What are you doing out here all alone?" the woman asked, crouching down to meet Doris's gaze. She didn't come too close, her movements careful and deliberate. I lost my mommy," Doris said, her voice quivering. The woman nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That's a tough spot to be in. What's your name, little one?" Doris hesitated, clutching the bunny she still carried. "Doris," she mumbled. The woman smiled faintly. "Well, Doris, my name's Catherine. Why don't you come with me? I know a warm spot where we can wait and figure things out." Doris hesitated again, but Catherine held out her hand, palm up, inviting but not demanding. After a long moment, Doris reached out, her small hand slipping into Catherine's rough, calloused one. Catherine led her to an old, abandoned building tucked between two graffiti-streaked walls. Inside, the space smelled faintly of damp concrete and stale air, but it was dry. A small fire burned in a rusted metal barrel, casting flickering light across the walls. A threadbare blanket lay spread on the ground, and a few cans of food were stacked neatly in a corner. "Here, sit down and get warm," Catherine said, shrugging off her coat and draping it around Doris's shoulders. She rummaged through a battered bag and pulled out a slightly squashed peanut butter sandwich. "It's not fancy, but it's better than nothing." Doris took the sandwich with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She bit into it hesitantly, the familiar taste grounding her in the unfamiliar surroundings. "You'll be safe here," Catherine said gently, settling onto the blanket beside her. "We'll figure everything out in the morning, okay?" Doris nodded, her fear slowly ebbing away under Catherine's steady presence. She leaned into the warmth of the coat, the firelight dancing in her wide eyes. "Maybe I'll just be Anna," she said quietly, more to herself than to Catherine. "Anna sounds nice." Catherine tilted her head, but didn't question it. "Anna it is," she said, her voice kind. The rain outside continued to fall, but inside, the small room felt almost safe. Doris, now Anna, closed her eyes, the sound of Catherine's quiet humming lulling her into an uneasy sleep. The phone buzzed violently against the glass tabletop, shattering the silence of Richard's meticulously arranged apartment. He reached for it, his heart sinking at the name flashing on the screen. Rachel. She rarely called, and when she did, it was never good news. He answered, already bracing himself. "Rachel!" Her voice came through, panicked and high-pitched. "She's gone! Doris is gone, Richard!" The words hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean, gone? Where is she?" I don't know. Rachel let out short gasps of breath. We were at the park. She was there, and then she wasn't. I looked everywhere. I don't remember, Richard. I don't remember anything. Richard was already grabbing his keys. Stay there. I'm coming. The apartment was a mess. Richard stepped over scattered papers and half-empty bottles, his sharp gaze scanning the room for any sign of order. Rachel sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands trembling as they clutched a cigarette she hadn't lit. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with fear. I told you I can't remember, she said, her voice cracking. You lost her. Richard's tone was icy, his fury barely contained. How does that even happen, Rachel? I don't know, she snapped back, her voice laced with desperation. 1 second she was there, and then… She broke off, her head dropping into her hands. I can't think straight. I've been searching for hours, but… Richard, I don't know where she is. Richard stood still for a moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to yell, to throw blame, but none of that would bring Doris back. He exhaled sharply and pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling the police, he said firmly. We'll find her. The search began immediately. Richard's face appeared on every local news channel, his voice steady but urgent as he described Doris. She's 4 years old, about this tall, with curly brown hair. She was last seen wearing a purple raincoat. Flyers with Doris's picture covered the city by nightfall, stapled to telephone poles, plastered on bus stops. Richard went from precincts to shelters to hospitals, his determination fueled by a potent mix of guilt and fear. Each police call instilled a surge of hope, only to be shattered by yet another disappointment. Back at her apartment, Rachel was unraveling. She sat amidst the clutter, rocking back and forth, muttering fragments of sentences that trailed off into silence. It's my fault, she whispered at one point, her voice barely audible. I let her go. When Richard returned to check on her, he found her pacing, her hands tugging at her hair. What if she's hurt? What if… Her voice cracked. I can't remember, Richard. Why can't I remember? Rachel. He caught her by the shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. You need to calm down. Her eyes darted wildly, and she laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Calm down. Our daughter is missing? And you want me to calm down? Richard let her go, his jaw tightening. You're not helping like this. I need you to focus. Focus? She shot back. Where were you for the last month, Richard? Working late? Ignoring our calls? Don't you dare put this all on me. Her words struck a nerve, but Richard refused to rise to the bait. He turned away, his hand brushing against a stack of unopened mail. The chaos of the apartment, the neglect, it all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. He had seen this spiral before, but he had let it go unchecked. And now, Doris was gone. The days blurred together. Richard barely slept, subsisting on coffee and adrenaline as he combed the city. He retraced every step Rachel could recall, questioning anyone who might have seen a little girl in a purple raincoat. His polished exterior began to fray, his tailored suits replaced by crumpled jackets and dark circles under his eyes. Everywhere he went, he saw traces of Doris. A child's laughter from a playground turned his head, only to reveal a stranger's face. A stuffed bunny in a store window brought him to a halt, his breath catching painfully in his chest. Rachel's condition worsened. She spoke less and cried more, retreating further into herself with each passing day. Once, when he stopped by the apartment, he found her sitting on the floor, staring blankly at Doris's watercolor set. The paints remained untouched, the brushes still clean. We'll find her, he said, more to himself than to Rachel. The words felt empty now. a mantra he repeated to stave off despair. But as each lead dried up, as the police started to focus their attention elsewhere, Richard's hope began to flicker. He sat alone in his car one night, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind cycling through every decision, every moment that had brought them to this point. Somewhere out there, Doris was waiting for him. He wouldn't stop searching. He couldn't. The streets of New York bustled with life, the chaotic hum of voices, horns, and footsteps blending into a symphony of survival. Catherine navigated the crowded sidewalks with practiced ease, her patched coat pulled tightly around her thin frame. Beside her, a girl with dark curls peeked out from beneath an oversized knit hat. Her small hand gripped Catherine's firmly. Anna, as she now referred to herself, exuded a quiet confidence that defied her age. Catherine had taught her well. The girl knew which corners were safe to rest in, how to avoid the wrong kind of attention, and when to speak up to earn a bit of kindness from strangers. Catherine didn't just shield Anna from the harshness of the world, they faced it together. "Here," Catherine murmured, pointing to a small cafe with outdoor seating. She didn't stop walking, but her sharp eyes scanned the tables. Anna followed her gaze, spotting the half-eaten sandwich left unattended by a distracted customer. Without hesitation, she darted forward, snatching the sandwich and slipping it into Catherine's bag. "Good girl," Catherine whispered as they rounded the corner. Her lips curved into a rare smile. "Quick hands, quiet feet. You'll never go hungry that way." Anna beamed up at her, a flicker of pride lighting her face. "You taught me." "That I did." Catherine ruffled the girl's curls gently. "And you're learning fast." They found a spot beneath an old awning, shielded from the cold wind that whipped through the streets. Catherine pulled out the sandwich, tearing it in half and handing the larger piece to Anna. The girl bit into it, eagerly, her legs swinging beneath her as she perched on an overturned milk crate. "I heard a song today," Anna said between bites, her voice soft. "On the radio by the gas station." "Yeah? What kind of song?" Catherine leaned back, her gaze flicking to the street to watch for trouble. "It was familiar. I don't know why." Anna frowned slightly, her small fingers tapping an absent rhythm against the crate. "It made me think of a man with kind eyes." Catherine glanced at her, eyebrows raising slightly. "A man with kind eyes?" Anna nodded. "I don't remember who, though. Just, it felt nice." Catherine didn't press. She learned early on that Anna's memories came in fragments, fragile and fleeting, like pieces of a puzzle scattered in the wind. For now, it was enough that the girl felt safe. The days were long, but Catherine and Anna moved through them together. Catherine had a way of making the city feel less menacing, her sharp wit and steady presence creating a bubble of security around them. She taught Anna how to barter for old clothes at thrift shops, how to charm vendors for an extra piece of fruit, and which shelters offered the best chances of a warm meal. At night, in the safety of their abandoned building, Catherine would hum old tunes while Anna curled up beneath a frayed blanket. Sometimes, Anna asked about Catherine's past. "Did you always live like this?" Anna asked one night, her voice muffled against the blanket. "No," Catherine replied, her tone wistful. "Once, I had a nice house, a family, even a garden with roses." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened in the dim light. "But life doesn't always go the way you plan." "What happened?" Anna whispered. "Bad luck, bad choices." Catherine shrugged, pulling the blanket tighter around Anna's shoulders. "But then I found you, didn't I? That's a fortunate turn of events." Anna smiled at that, her small hand reaching out to grip Catherine's. I'm glad you found me." Catherine squeezed her hand gently. "Me too, kid. Me too." As the weeks turned to months, their bond deepened. Anna grew stronger, more resilient, and Catherine found a renewed sense of purpose. For all the hardships they faced them together. But there were moments, fleeting, barely there, when Anna's eyes lingered too long on a passing face, or her head tilted at the sound of a familiar tune. Memories stirred in her mind, fragments of a life before Catherine, a warm kitchen, a man's deep laugh, the feel of a stuffed bunny clutched to her chest. For now, those memories remained out of reach. But Catherine noticed the faraway look in Anna's eyes and wondered how long their little world might last before the past came knocking. As they settled into another night beneath the shelter of their makeshift home, Catherine stroked Anna's hair, her roughened fingers gentle against the girl's curls. The city outside continued its relentless march, but here, in the quiet flicker of their shared firelight, they had carved out a place of safety and care. Whatever the world threw at them next, they would face it together. For Catherine and Anna, the bond they'd forged was more than survival. It was their lifeline, their hope, and their beginning. The community center buzzed with subdued chatter and the clatter of plastic trays as volunteers served steaming bowls of soup to the long line of men, women, and children waiting their turn. Richard Watkins moved efficiently down the row, his sleeves rolled up, scooping ladles of soup into outstretched bowls. It was an unlikely sight. His crisp demeanor softened in the humbleness of the task. "Here you go," he said, offering a warm smile to a woman with a toddler balanced on her hip. "There's bread at the next table." Her quiet gratitude tugged at something in him he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of purpose, of connection. It was moments like these that had drawn him here, away from the unrelenting grind of his business and the haunting quiet of his home. "Hey, Richard," a fellow volunteer called, pointing toward the dwindling stack of bowls. "Can you grab more from the back?" "On it." He nodded and stepped away, weaving through the maze of tables. His focus was practical, his steps brisk, until something caught his eye. A girl. She sat at a table near the far corner, her dark curls peeking out from beneath a knit hat. She was leaning forward, her small hands cupping a bowl as if it were a precious treasure. Beside her, a woman with a weathered face and kind eyes broke a piece of bread in half and handed it to the girl. Richard's breath became trapped in his throat. His steps faltered. It was something about her posture, the curve of her cheek, as she turned to laugh at something the woman said. The movement stirred a memory, faint but unmistakable, the curve of a cheek he knew too well. The flicker of a laugh he thought he'd lost forever. Could it be? He stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. It wasn't possible. Doris was gone, had been for 3 years. The woman beside her noticed his gaze and stiffened, her protective instincts flaring. She whispered something to the girl, Anna, and Richard saw her glance toward him briefly before returning her attention to the bread. Richard realized he'd been staring. Collecting himself, he approached the table cautiously, each step deliberate. "Hello," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I couldn't help noticing—" He hesitated, suddenly unsure how to continue. "I just wanted to say hello." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression softened when she saw his genuine uncertainty. "Hello," she replied cautiously, her voice rough but polite. "Can we help you with something?" Richard's gaze flickered to the girl. She was watching him now, her wide eyes curious but guarded. "Listening to a good story on a beautiful day is really great. What season is it in your country right now? Why not share it in the comments and we might guess which region you are from. He faltered, forcing a smile. I'm sorry. I thought I recognized her. My mistake. The girl tilted her head, studying him for a moment. Then she smiled, a small, hesitant smile that sent a pang straight through his chest. What's your name? He asked, his voice catching slightly. Anna, she said softly. The name struck him like a blast of icy water, simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar. Not Doris. Anna. He nodded slowly, his smile tightening. It's nice to meet you, Anna. Catherine shifted slightly, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. We don't mean to be rude, but we're just here for a meal. Is there something you need? Richard shook his head quickly. No, of course not. I'm sorry for intruding. He stepped back, his hands clenching at his sides. Enjoy your meal. He turned and walked away, his heart pounding. He could feel their eyes on his back, but he didn't look back. Instead, he returned to the serving line, his hands working automatically as his thoughts churned. Anna. The name echoed in his mind. The girl's features, her mannerisms, they were too similar to dismiss. Yet, how could it be her? It had been 3 years. He had to be mistaken. But what if he wasn't? That night, Richard sat in his dimly lit office, a stack of files untouched on his desk. His mind replayed the encounter over and over, dissecting every detail. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen Doris, or at least some part of her, in that girl. Pulling out his laptop, he began searching. It didn't take long to find records of Catherine. Her history was sparse, filled with gaps and half-told stories, but enough to piece together a picture. A once promising life derailed by tragedy, now spent scraping by on the fringes of society. And then there was Anna. No records, no connections. She was a ghost, existing only in the here and now. Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. If there was even a chance that Anna was Doris, he had to know. But how could he approach this without shattering the fragile existence they had built? Hope warred with fear in his chest. If he was wrong, he would be opening old wounds. But if he was right? For the first time in years, the faintest ember of hope flickered in the darkness. And Richard knew he couldn't let it go. A haze of calculated steps and growing resolve enveloped the next few weeks. Richard found himself returning to the soup kitchen more often, volunteering with a determination that puzzled his fellow workers. Each visit brought him closer to Catherine and Anna, though he was careful not to overstep. Catherine remained wary, her eyes sharp whenever he drew near, but he made a point to be patient, never rushing the fragile trust he hoped to build. It was a cold evening when he found himself at their usual corner table. Catherine and Anna were sharing a meal, and as Richard approached with an easy smile, he noticed the way Anna's small hand rested lightly on Catherine's arm. "Evening," Richard greeted, his tone casual but warm. "Mind if I sit?" Catherine glanced at him, her expression guarded but less hostile than before. "Suit yourself." He settled into the chair across from them, his gaze flickering briefly to Anna. She was focused on her bowl, but she gave him a shy smile when she caught him looking. "What brings you back here so often?" Catherine asked, her tone pointed. "Don't you have other places to be?" Richard chuckled lightly as her words resonated deeply with him. "I guess I found something worth coming back for," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Anna's. "Helping out here. It feels right." Catherine studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly, her shoulders relaxing. The moments came slowly at first, small, fleeting behaviors that sent Richard's heart into overdrive. The way Anna tilted her head when she listened, the way her fingers fidgeted with a loose thread on her coat, her laugh that carried a hint of Doris's lilt. Each observation deepened his certainty, but it was her words one evening that cemented his suspicions. "I had a bunny once," Anna said suddenly, her voice soft. She was tracing patterns in the condensation on her water glass. It had a floppy ear. Richard froze, his heart thundering. "A bunny?" he asked carefully. Anna nodded, her curls bouncing slightly. "I think so. I don't remember much, but it felt nice. Like someone I loved gave it to me." Catherine shot him a sharp look, her hand tightening on Anna's shoulder. "She doesn't remember much of before," she said firmly, "and that's fine by us." Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course. I didn't mean to pry." But inside, his mind raced. He recalled the bunny he had gifted to Doris, the one she had cherished through every bedtime, tale, and abrasion on her knee. It couldn't be a coincidence. Richard waited for the right moment, carefully choosing his words one evening as they sat around the table. "Catherine," he began, his voice steady, "I need to ask you something important." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. "What?" He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. "I think Anna might be someone I've been looking for. My daughter." Catherine stiffened, her expression hardening. "What are you talking about?" "I know it sounds crazy," Richard said quickly, his tone calm but pleading. "But there are too many similarities. Her mannerisms, her memories. I can't ignore them. I think Anna might be Doris." Catherine's hand tightened on Anna's shoulder, pulling her closer. "She's Anna. She's my family." Richard held her gaze, his voice softening. "I'm not trying to take her away from you. But if there's even a chance, I need to know." Catherine hesitated, her protective instinct warring with the sincerity in his voice. She looked at Anna, who watched them with wide, curious eyes. "What do you want from us?" Catherine finally asked, her voice low. "A DNA test," Richard said simply. "It's quick and painless. I'll handle everything. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away. But if I'm right, we can figure out what's best for her together." Catherine's jaw tightened, but she saw the desperation in his eyes. She glanced at Anna, then back at Richard. "Fine," she said grudgingly. "But if this is some kind of trick—" "It's not," Richard interrupted. "Thank you, truly." The days that followed were tense. Richard arranged for the test, handling every detail with meticulous care. Catherine kept her distance, her wariness palpable, but she stayed true to her word. Anna didn't fully understand what was happening, but she trusted Catherine, and that trust extended to Richard. When the results finally arrived, Richard sat alone in his office, the envelope heavy in his hands. He opened it slowly, his breath catching as his eyes scanned the words. Match. 99.9%. He exhaled shakily, tears blurring his vision. Doris. It was her. After 3 years of searching, hoping, and doubting, she was here, alive and within reach. Richard clutched the paper tightly, his heart overflowing with emotions he couldn't yet name. Relief, joy, fear. The journey ahead would be complicated, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that his family might one day be whole again. The knock on Catherine's makeshift door echoed through the abandoned building. She frowned, glancing at Anna, who sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a handful of small, shiny stones. "Stay here," Catherine said firmly, rising to her feet. She moved cautiously to the door and opened it slightly, her sharp eyes narrowing when she saw Richard standing in the dim hallway. "What now?" she asked, her voice low and wary. Richard hesitated, his hand tightening around the envelope he held. "I need to talk to both of you," he said. His voice, steady but layered with emotion, made Catherine pause. "It's important." Catherine studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Come in." Anna looked up as Richard entered, her curiosity piqued by his serious expression. He crouched down to her level, holding the envelope carefully. "Anna," he began softly, "there's something I need to tell you." She blinked at him, clutching one of the stones in her small hand. "What is it?" "You're not just Anna," Richard said, his voice catching slightly. "Your name is Doris. That's the name your mum and I gave you when you were born." Anna tilted her head, her brows furrowing. "Doris?" she repeated, as though the word were foreign. Richard nodded, his gaze steady. 3 years ago, your mum lost you in the park. It wasn't your fault, but you got separated. We've been looking for you ever since." Anna's lips parted slightly, confusion mingling with a flicker of recognition. "You've been looking for me?" "For 3 years," Richard said, his voice breaking slightly. "We never stopped. And now that I've found you, I don't want to lose you again." Catherine watched silently, her arms crossed as Anna processed the words. Slowly, she whispered, "Doris, I think I remember. A little." Richard's breath hitched. "You don't have to remember everything. Just know that you were always loved, and we're here now. I'm your dad." The room fell silent, save for the faint sound of Anna's stones dropping softly to the floor as her small hands trembled. For the first time, she looked at Richard, not as a stranger, but as someone she might know, someone she might trust. The car pulled up to the towering gates of Richard's estate, its sleek, black body gleaming under the pale winter sun. Catherine shifted uncomfortably in the back seat, her patched coat incongruous against the leather upholstery. Beside her, Anna clutched her hand tightly, her wide eyes fixed on the sprawling mansion beyond the gates. "You sure about this?" Catherine asked, her voice low but firm. Her gaze flicked to Richard in the driver's seat. He turned to meet her eyes, his expression soft but resolute. "I'm sure. This is where she belongs." His gaze shifted to Anna, a flicker of tenderness softening his voice. "Where you both belong." The gates creaked open, and the car rolled down the long driveway. Anna pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the manicured lawns and the grand facade of the house. It was a world away from the grimy streets and abandoned buildings she had called home. Inside, the house was warm, the scent of polished wood and freshly cut flowers filling the air. Anna stood hesitantly in the entryway, her small figure dwarfed by the high ceilings and ornate chandeliers. Catherine hovered protectively behind her, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. "This way," Richard said gently, leading them into a cozy sitting room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the plush furniture. "Make yourselves comfortable." Anna perched on the edge of a sofa, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. Catherine remained standing, her arms crossed. "This is a lot," she admitted, her voice edged with suspicion. Richard nodded. "I know. It's an adjustment. Take your time." His tone was patient, almost pleading. He turned to Anna, crouching to meet her eyes. "What do you think, Anna? Do you like it?" She hesitated, her gaze darting between him and Catherine. "It's big," she said softly. Richard smiled, despite the weight of her uncertainty tugging at his heart. "It is. But it's yours now, if you want it." Anna didn't respond, her grip on Catherine's hand tightening. Richard straightened, his smile faltering. "I'll show you to your room," he said, his voice quieter. Richard had meticulously designed Anna's room, transforming it into a utopia. A canopy bed draped in soft pink fabric stood in the center, surrounded by shelves filled with books and toys. A stuffed bunny with floppy ears sat on the pillow, its fur pristine. Anna stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Catherine placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice low. "What do you think, kid?" Anna didn't answer. Instead, she walked slowly to the bed, picking up the bunny. She held it close, her fingers brushing its soft fur. "It's nice," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Richard watched from the doorway, his chest tightening. He had imagined this moment so many times, but the reality was far more fragile than he had anticipated. He knew he couldn't force her to feel at home here. Not yet. In the days that followed, Anna struggled to find her footing in this unfamiliar world of luxury. She clung to Catherine, rarely leaving her side, even as Richard tried to gently bridge the gap between them. He brought her favorite foods to the table, though she ate sparingly. He sat with her in the library, offering to read stories, though she listened with a guarded expression. He even ventured into the city to find a duplicate of the watercolor set she once loved, hoping to spark a flicker of recognition. Slowly, moments of connection began to emerge. One evening, as Richard showed Anna how to use the grand piano in the parlor, she hesitated before pressing a single key. The soft note lingered in the air, and for a moment she smiled. But her memories remained elusive, and Richard knew better than to push. He focused instead on building new ones, patiently waiting for her to find her place. The peace was short-lived. News of Doris's return reached Rachel within days. She appeared at Richard's doorstep, unannounced, her face pale and drawn. "I need to see her," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "I need to see my daughter." Richard blocked the doorway, his jaw tightening. "Rachel, this isn't the time." "She's my child, Richard," Rachel said, her voice rising. "You can't keep her from me." "I'm not keeping her from you," Richard replied, his tone firm. "But she's been through enough. I won't let you upset her." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but they burned with anger. "You think you're the only one who's suffered? I've been searching for her too." Richard's voice softened, though his resolve remained unshaken. "If you want to see her, you'll do it on my terms. She needs stability, Rachel, not more chaos." The tension crackled between them, but Rachel finally relented, stepping back with a shaky breath. "Fine," she said, "but this isn't over." Richard watched her retreat, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but as he returned to the sitting room and saw Anna curled up beside Catherine, he felt a flicker of hope. The soft knock on the door echoed through the spacious house. Richard braced himself, glancing at Catherine and Anna, who were seated near the fireplace. Catherine gave him a questioning look, but he shook his head. "It's her," he said quietly. Anna looked up, her eyes wide. "Who?" "Your mum," Richard replied, his voice gentle. He walked to the door and opened it to find Rachel standing there, her face pale and gaunt. Her hands trembled as she clutched the strap of her handbag. "Where is she?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking. "I need to see her." Richard stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in, Rachel, but don't push her. She's still adjusting." Rachel entered hesitantly, her eyes darting around the luxurious room until they landed on Anna. For a brief moment, time appeared to pause. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up as she stepped forward. "Doris," she whispered. Anna tensed, leaning closer to Catherine. "My name is Anna," she said firmly, her voice small but resolute. Rachel faltered, her breath catching. "No, sweetheart. Your name is Doris. You're my daughter." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard moved to stand beside Anna, his protective instincts flaring. "Rachel, take it slow," he warned. But before Rachel could respond, Anna's face changed, her brows furrowed, her lips parting as though something distant and painful had clicked into place. "Doris," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You called me that before." The room stilled as Anna's small hands gripped the edges of her chair. "I remember," she whispered, her voice trembling. You were mad. You said it was my fault." Rachel's face crumpled. "What? No, Doris. Anna, I didn't mean—" Anna spoke quickly, her fragmented memories weaving together into a jumbled narrative. "You said Daniel was gone because of me. You said I shouldn't be there, that it was my fault he died. And then you left me. At the park." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You left me there, and I didn't know where to go." Catherine's face darkened with anger, her arm wrapping protectively around Anna. "You abandoned her," she said coldly, her voice a blade cutting through the air. Rachel shook her head violently, tears spilling freely. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking straight. I was broken. I thought I'd come back for her, but then she was gone. I didn't mean to leave her. I didn't mean any of it." Richard's fists clenched at his sides, his voice low and tight. "You blamed her for something she had no control over. You left her, Rachel. You left our daughter alone in the world." Rachel collapsed into a nearby chair, her sobs racking her body. "I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I was so broken." Anna stared at her mother, her tears drying on her cheeks as a mix of confusion and hurt settled in her wide eyes. "You said it was my fault," she repeated, her voice shaking. "It wasn't," Rachel choked out, her hands trembling as she reached toward Anna. "It wasn't your fault, sweetheart. It was never your fault. I was hurting. I was wrong." Anna turned away, burying her face in Catherine's shoulder. "You left me," she whispered. Rachel's hand dropped to her lap, her sobs quieting into broken breaths. Richard stepped forward, his voice firm, but not unkind. "Rachel, I think you need to leave. She needs time." Rachel nodded weakly, rising to her feet. Her movements were slow, as though the weight of her guilt threatened to crush her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." As she left, the room remained heavy with silence. Richard knelt beside Anna, his voice soft. "She was wrong to leave you. And what she said, none of that was true. None of it." Catherine's arm tightened around Anna as the girl nodded slowly, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You're safe now," Catherine murmured. "You're here, and we're not going anywhere." For the first time, Richard and Catherine exchanged a glance of shared understanding. Together, they would help Anna heal. The scars of her past ran deep, but for now, she was no longer alone. Richard sat in his study, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the polished wood. Stacks of papers, files, and legal documents lay spread before him. He rubbed his temples, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Rachel's erratic behavior had left him with no choice. Her instability was a danger to herself, and most importantly, to Doris. He picked up the phone, his voice steady as he spoke to the psychiatrist. "Dr. Martinez, I want to move forward with the recommendation for Rachel's admission. She needs help, and so does my daughter." The voice on the other end responded calmly, explaining the steps for voluntary admission to a psychiatric facility. Richard nodded as he took notes, his pen moving swiftly over the paper. "Yes, I'll handle the logistics. Thank you." He ended the call with a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. Rachel's erratic behavior and guilt had left a trail of emotional damage, but Richard was determined to set boundaries and find a solution. His thoughts turned to Doris, no Anna, and the fragility in her wide eyes as she recounted those fragmented, painful memories. Later that day, Richard found Doris sitting cross-legged in her room, cradling the stuffed bunny he had given her. She looked up as he entered, her expression hesitant but calm. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, settling into a chair beside her. She nodded, hugging the bunny closer. "Doris? Anna," he began gently. "Do you hate Rachel?" She blinked, startled by the question. Her brows knitted together as she searched for an answer. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I think I'm mad at her. She hurt me, but I don't know if I hate her." Richard nodded slowly. "It's okay to feel that way. What she did, what she said, was wrong. She was hurting, but that doesn't mean it was your fault." Doris looked down at the bunny, her fingers brushing its floppy ear. "Do you hate her?" she asked quietly. Richard exhaled, leaning forward. "No, I don't hate her. I feel sad for her. When we lost Daniel, she lost a part of herself, and she made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I believe she loved you and Daniel, even if she didn't show it the right way." Doris's voice wavered. "You loved Daniel too, didn't you?" Richard's chest tightened. "I did. I loved him so much. He was quiet, thoughtful, a little shy. He loved cars, just like I did when I was his age." His voice grew softer. "The day we lost him, it was the hardest day of my life. I lost a son. And in a way, I lost your mum, too." Tears welled in Doris's eyes. "Did you think it was my fault?" Richard reached out, taking her small hands in his. "Never. Not for a single second. What happened to Daniel was an accident. You were just a little girl, Doris. None of it was your fault." Doris snorted, her voice barely audible over a whisper. "But she said it was." "She was wrong," Richard said firmly. "She was lost in her pain, and she lashed out. But that doesn't make her words true." The next day, Richard met with Rachel in a quiet room at the hospital. She sat slumped in her chair, her hands twisting the strap of her bag. Her face was pale, lined with exhaustion and guilt. "They want me to stay," she said, her voice brittle. "They think I need help." "They're right," Richard said gently. "You need this, Rachel. Not just for Doris, for yourself." Rachel shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "She hates me. I saw it in her eyes." "She doesn't hate you," Richard said, his voice soft but steady. "She's hurt. She's confused. But she doesn't hate you." Rachel looked down, her hands trembling. "What if I never get to see her again?" "You will," Richard promised. "But only when you're ready. Only when she's ready. I'll bring her to see you when the time is right." Rachel stared at him for a long moment before nodding weakly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." That evening, Doris sat beside Catherine on the couch, leaning into her warmth. Catherine wrapped an arm around her, her protective presence as steady as ever. "Do you think she'll get better?" Doris asked quietly. "I think she'll try," Catherine replied. "And that's a start." Doris nodded, her gaze fixed on the crackling fire. For the first time, the weight of her past felt a little lighter. With Catherine by her side and Richard's unwavering love, she began to believe in the possibility of healing. The road ahead would be long, but for now, she was safe. For now, she was loved. The bright morning sun filtered through the large windows of the psychiatric hospital's visiting room. The once sterile space had been transformed into something warm and inviting. Soft furniture, vibrant artwork adorning the walls, and a small table where fresh flowers bloomed. Richard sat with Doris beside him, her small hands gripping his as she glanced around, her expression a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Doris nodded hesitantly, her curls bouncing slightly. "I think so." The door opened, and Rachel entered. She looked different, healthier. Her once gaunt face had regained some color, and her movements were calm and deliberate. She smiled softly when her eyes met Doris's, though tears quickly brimmed. "Hi, Doris," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "Or, do you still go by Anna?" Doris blinked, her grip on Richard's hand tightening. "You can call me Doris," she said quietly. Rachel's smile wavered, and she clasped her hands in front of her, as if afraid to reach out. "Thank you for coming to see me. I've missed you so much." There was an awkward silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then Rachel knelt before Doris, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Doris, for everything. I said terrible things, things I didn't mean. I blamed you for something that was never your fault. And leaving you, it was the worst mistake of my life." Doris stared at her mother, tears welling in her eyes. "You really hurt me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You said it was my fault Daniel died." Rachel's face crumpled. "It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. I was broken, Doris. I let my pain control me, and I pushed it onto you. I wish I could take it all back." Doris looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she whispered, "I don't hate you." Rachel gasped softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't?" "No," Doris said, meeting her mother's gaze. "But I don't know if I can forget." Rachel nodded, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to. I just hope one day you can forgive me." Doris hesitated, then stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Rachel's shoulders. "I think I can try," she murmured. Rachel sobbed quietly, holding her daughter close. Richard watched, his own eyes misty. He had doubted this moment would ever come, but seeing them together now, he felt a glimmer of hope. The ride home was quiet, but a comforting kind of quiet. Doris leaned against Richard's side in the back seat, her eyes half closed. Catherine sat beside her, a reassuring hand on her knee. "Are you okay, kiddo?" Catherine asked. Doris nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, I think I am." When they arrived back at the estate, the house seemed brighter, livelier, as though it had been waiting for this moment to exhale. Doris ran ahead into the garden, her laughter ringing out as she chased a butterfly across the lawn. Richard stood beside Catherine on the porch, watching her. "She's come a long way," he said softly. "She's stronger than she looks," Catherine replied. "And so are you." Richard smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "I couldn't have done this without you." Catherine shrugged, but her expression softened. "Maybe. But she needed you more than anything." That evening, the house was filled with laughter. Doris and Richard played a board game in the living room, their playful banter echoing through the halls. Catherine sat nearby, a book in her lap, occasionally joining in with a quip of her own. For the first time in years, the Watkins home felt alive again. As the fire crackled in the hearth and Doris's laughter filled the room, Richard glanced at Catherine and then at his daughter. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it no longer felt insurmountable. Together, they had built something new, something strong. And for the first time, Richard allowed himself to believe that they were finally home. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.